it is my pleasure to introduce one of the greatest actors of television and cinematic history, James Drury.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, that's not strictly true. I do know what the name is, but it's a secret. And I can't tell anybody. You know, the wonderful thing that Owen Wister did for all the actors, and there have been quite a few actors that have played the Virginian over the years, starting with a very successful Broadway show right after the book came out in 1902. I believe it was Dustin Farnham that opened it on Broadway. And then William S. Hart played it on the First Road Company. And then they traded off and back and forth, and both did a silent movie version of it. Gary Cooper did a silent movie version of it and the first talking version of it. Joel McCrea did the second talking version of it, and Bill Pullman did the third talking version of it. And I've done both television versions. Some of you may have seen a half-hour pilot that's in some anthology shows that you'll see around of the Virginian. It was a rather different take on the character, although the basic character was the same. He was, again, the man with no name. And this character, the Virginian, was really the granddaddy of all the great Western heroes. Clint Eastwood's The Man with No Name, for example. There's always, down through the history of Westerns, have been strangers that came to town and did not give their right name or never mentioned their name, and it gave them an aura of mystery that the actor really didn't have to do anything to achieve. It was just built into the role. And it gave a tremendous dramatic device to the actor to work with, and I always enjoyed it very much. It made it difficult to register at a hotel, but other than that, I never had much problem with it. Of course, when you think about it, if a guy came to Wyoming today and tried out or applied for the job of a foreman of a 500,000-acre cattle ranch, he'd have to give his Social Security, his name, his driver's license, and 4 forms of identification. The Virginian just walked in there and said, I can do the job, and I will do the job, and that was it. Westerns are, as my dear friend Richard Farnsworth used to say, they are our American Camelot. They're the period of history that only took place in about a 30-year period, from the 40-year period, from the end of the Civil War in 1865 to 1895, or another 5, and that was it. The West was settled, and all the stories that we all thrill to and have since we were little kids, all of Roy's and Gene's and Hopalong stories, all came from that period of time. So it's a period that has inspired us and encouraged us, much like Camelot always has. The Knights of the Round Table and Sir Galahad and so forth have always inspired the English and encouraged them. Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that. If this was Medicine Bow, would it be Monongahela whiskey? I always ordered Monongahela because I figured that after the Civil War, the Virginian went up through the Three Rivers area and probably got a taste for that good rye whiskey up there. Plus which it comes in an interesting bottle, kind of like a Maker's Mark bottle. It's a real whiskey. And I always ordered it at the Long Branch Saloon, of course, or any other saloon I was in. Of course, that was all watered down Coca-Cola or iced tea. But the beer was real. You can't fake a head on a glass of beer. Anyway, I would like to tell you tonight that we come from a land of illusion. The profession of acting is that of creating the illusion of reality. And whatever we can do to make sure that you as an audience believe that what you're seeing on the screen or on the stage is actually happening. It is what Aristotle called the willing suspension of disbelief. And did you know that in the time of the Greek drama, the drama was viewed by everyone in Athens and Carthage as the place where they learned about life, where they learned how life should be lived. And most of these plays were tragedies, of course, and how sad and terribly tragic things could turn out if you didn't follow the rules. In fact, in Athens in the early days, if a citizen did not go to the theater when a play came out, they were fined, just like a traffic ticket. They were fined. It wasn't a serious offense, but everyone was expected to go to the theater because it was the beginning, the cradle of our civilization as we know it today. And the rules were made up and were expounded in that theater. So now, during the Western period, when I was privileged to be working as an actor in Hollywood, we were able to create this illusion of reality and give a lot of rules that a lot of people have told me here many, many times helped raise them, helped bring them up to the point where they can live happy, productive, worthwhile lives. And I've always considered that the greatest compliment I could get. And one greater compliment. The show next year, it will be 50 years since we started the Virginian, 1962 and 1971. I'm a grandfather, and I've got a lot of grandfathers, friends of mine, calling me and saying, Jim, you know, my grandkids are watching your show on Encore, and they're not being asked and they're not being told. They just come in and sit down and watch the show, and then they watch it again the next day. Now that, folks, is a compliment. I've got another generation that I'm able to appear in front of, and it makes me very, very happy. I'm busier than I've been in 40 years, 50 years. We just got back from the Memphis Film Festival, and earlier than that, the Festival of the West in Scottsdale. I came to this wonderful, wonderful theater you have here in Allen, Texas. And by the way, it's a small world. I was in Memphis, and a great big fella come in. His name was Andy Anderson. Same name as my holster maker from Fort Smith, Arkansas. But Andy is a black Angus cattle raiser from Tupelo, Mississippi, one of Elvis's hometowns. And they were having an Elvis festival there, and they had 1,000 Elvises in Tupelo, all sizes, shapes, and forms. And I always am interested in what happens with Elvis because I played his older brother in his very first picture, Love Me Tender. One of his older brothers, Richard Egan and Bill Campbell and myself. We went off to the Civil War, and Elvis stayed home with Deborah Paget, which led to some mischief. At any rate, he was talking to me, and he said, you know, my ancestors were the Allens. And when the Civil War was over, Mississippi was burned to the ground. And the Allens, the whole clan, all of them, moved to Texas and founded a village called Allen, Texas. And that's where we sit tonight. So it's a small world. I told him I was coming. I'm going from here up to Montrose, Colorado. There's a big musical festival and film festival up there that we're going to attend for the first time. And then I'm going to be privileged the end of the month going up to Medicine Bow, Wyoming, where all of this started, where Owen Wister lived when he wrote The Virginian, to the 100th anniversary of the Virginian Hotel in Medicine Bow. And that should be probably the biggest thing that happens in Wyoming in this 10-year period. So I'm very privileged to be involved in that. How about this music? Let's hear another big hand for these people. You know, there never were any words to the Virginian, and they had to play it on canned music, I noticed as I came up, because there were never any words written for it. But it is a wonderful instrumental piece by Percy Faith, and it certainly lent a certain aura of majesty to the show that I've always appreciated, and I hope you do too. If I have any questions here, I'd be happy to answer them if I can. Anybody have a question? Yes, sir.
Oh, wait. We have a few house rules. I have to, hold on. So, the benefit of people who can't hear, I want to bring you the mic, and then we want to capture your question on the tape, so when he gives an answer, we'll know what to answer which question. So I'll bring the mic to you. Okay,
If
questions?
that confused you, folks, it sure confused me. That's very good.
Hi, my name's Bruce Whitwer, and I'm from California, and I'm watching old episodes of the Virginian, and it appears that it wasn't actually shot in Wyoming. Is that correct?
That's correct. It was all shot in and around Southern California on
It looks like the foothills is Sierra Nevadas, or
Sierra Nevadas, and we also did quite a bit in the mountains up on the Ridge Route between Los Angeles and Bakersfield.
Okay.
There's I don't know whether it's a state park or a national park up there that encompasses Mount Piñas, and that's a 12,000 foot peak up there, and it looks just like Jackson Hole. Okay. But if you go to Medicine Bow, which I'm going next week or week after next, it's flat as a pancake. There aren't any mountains for 100 miles.
You want to ask a question?
Yeah. You know what? I got a picture from you.
You have pictures of me?
I got one picture from you from the Alamo. Are you from the Alamo?
No, I'm not from the Alamo, but I've been to Brackettville.
I'm Brooke. How old were you when you did your last Virginian movie?
When I started the Virginian, I was 28 years old. And as I sit here, I'm 77, so you figure it out.
Mr. Drury,
Yes, ma'am.
would you tell us just a little bit about Bonanza and maybe an episode you were on in Bonanza?
I never appeared on Bonanza.
Okay.
No, but the time when we started the Virginian, Bonanza started about close to the same time. And it was one network would not look kindly upon a star from an NBC going over to, I think Bonanza was CBS or ABC, I'm not sure. But they wouldn't have, the executives would not have looked kindly upon my appearing in Bonanza. But all those boys were friends of mine, and I applaud them. They lasted 6 more years than we did, so they did good.
Okay,
And I'd also, while I'm thinking of it, I'd like to just say one word about Jim Arness. I did a Gunsmoke every year for the first 5 years when it was a black and white half-hour show. And when I first walked onto the set and met Mr. Arness, who later I felt I could refer to him as Jim, but at that first meeting it was Mr. Arness, I looked right into his belt buckle. And I went across the street to Paramount Studios where there was a bootmaker named Al DePardo. And I said, Al, make me a pair of boots with the biggest lift in them you can get. And I went back across the street with those boots and I looked into his chest. So that's when I started doing Gunsmokes. And I must say, we lost him last week. He was a giant of a man in so many, many different ways. And many ways you'll probably not hear about for a long time, but he was a great man. And I will miss him every day. I hope you will too.
Jim, while I'm walking up there, tell them about what Walter Pidgeon, Ann Francis, and Leslie Nielsen, who starred with you on Forbidden Planet.
Oh, well, that was, at the time, we had no idea it would become such a classic piece of science fiction. And I understand that George Lucas in print had said that it was part of his inspiration for some of his his science fiction work, and I think Steven Spielberg also said the same. So we were in tall company there, but it was, for the time, we made that in 1954, and they spent $5 million on that picture, and that's equivalent to $100 million today. They built that computer that went 20 miles down into the center of the planet, which no one had ever even conceived of anything like that now. Of course, after that, they built the Cray computers and put the Cray in sequence, and they did go 20 miles across the Pentagon and so forth to crunch the numbers and crunch the computer information that we all live by today. I always tell people I'm still carrying a single-action pistol. I can't even turn a computer on. But I have a girl in London, Ohio, named Karen Lindsay, who called me 3 or 4 years ago and said, Mr. Drury, I'm just a fan, but can I put up a website for you? And I said, as long as I don't have to mess with it, you go right ahead. Well, she did, and the power of the internet and the power of the computer is just phenomenal. I can't tell you how far-reaching it is. We were in Cambridge, Ohio, at the Hopalong Casti Festival last summer, and a couple flew from Brazil, 18 hours to Miami, 4 more hours to Columbus, Ohio, and rented a car and came over and spent the weekend with us. And that's a far reach, in my view, to come all the way from Brazil. So that's what science fiction has done for us, folks. Only it's not fiction anymore.
I just recently watched an episode in which Betsy got married.
Ah, yes.
And I didn't realize that this was kind of a continuous story. I thought it was just an episode at a time, but evidently it was a continuous story that led to her wedding.
Well, that was actually, I think that was put together because she was leaving the show to get married. And she did get married and moved to Salt Lake, so we had to replace her, unfortunately. But that was when she left the show and left show business. She never worked in films again. But she'd been working since she was a little girl, and in all kinds of venues and all kinds of different people that she'd worked with, and she's had a great career. So she's still, we're having several Virginian reunions around the country now, and the next one will be next week in Montrose, Colorado, and she'll be there.
Jim, how many of the original cast are still alive?
I'm sorry?
How many of the original cast are still alive?
Well, we have Roberta Shore, Randy Boone, Gary Clark, Don Quine, Sarah Lane, and myself. I assume Diane Roeder's still alive, although I haven't been in contact with her. And I think Tim Matheson is still alive, of course. He was in the cast. And David Hartman, who became famous television talk show host and so forth. So they were all in the cast at one time or another. But all the older men who ran the ranch or owned the ranch have all passed on, unfortunately. And I'm getting up there. So I'm not getting any younger, folks. Have any more questions out here?
Hold on.
There's a pair right there.
A young lady, this means we're going to have Western music in the future.
What made you decide to start acting, and how did you go about doing that?
Well, I had no interest in it. And my mother, I believe, had played an extra role in a silent picture. And she wanted her children to be actors just desperately. And when I was 8 years old, she took me down to a children's theater group at the Greenwich Settlement House, a community center very much like the library here, in Sheridan Square in Manhattan Island, New York. And it was at Christmas time, and I was cast as King Herod in a biblical play about children, about the Christ child and the whole Holy Land, and all of that period of history. And I put on the long crepe hair beard and the long flowing robes, and I ranted and raved around the stage there, and I did know my lines, and I really didn't want to go on. She booted me on stage. booted me on stage, physically. I went out and I hit my marks and I said my words, and at the end of that, the people applauded. And I thought, well, if I can do this and get people to applaud, I better find out more about it. So I've studied it all the rest of my life and just kept at it, and that's how I got started.
You were such a strong character, and you did provide us with a hero. I want to know, who was your hero?
Well, of course, Roy and Gene and Hopalong. And I mean, how could you? I went to all the serials just like, well, most of you were just kids compared to me, but we went to all the Saturday morning serials, and John Wayne, of course, beyond belief, a great hero of mine. John Payne, Alan Ladd, all the great Western films that I could watch as a child, I watched, and I became imbued with them. And then I was fortunate enough to have parents that had ranches in Oregon, and I got on horseback when I was still in diapers. My grandfather put me up on his big Belgian plow horse, and I wouldn't come down all day. So I was crazy about horses from the time I was in diapers, literally. And it just is something that I've grown up with. And my grandfather came west with a wagon train, so at his knee I learned about the West and the Old West. People ask me why there are no Westerns on television and very few Westerns in motion pictures anymore. It's generational. The current generation is farther and farther and farther removed from that period of history. I'm not so far removed, but they are. So it's hard to get them interested. A good picture will always rise to the top, though, for sure. Anybody else?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes, there he is.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Drury,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to thank you for all the shows and stuff that you did, because they were really good to watch. In fact, I told someone earlier, my sister and I used to run home after school. If she got there, she got to watch the soap operas. If I got there, I got to watch you.
Okay.
It was one of
Very
those kind
good.
of deals. The question I had before you was, which one of the landowners was easiest to work with? Charles Bickford, John Daner, or Lee J. Cobb?
Don't forget John McIntyre.
Right.
They were all easy to work with. I enjoyed every one of them. I think I probably learned more from Charlie Bickford than I did from anybody else. He had some great things to teach and some great history in his career and in his life. And I enjoyed them all, though. They were wonderful. And John McIntyre and his wife, Jeanette Nolan, were two of my favorites. And then in the final year, we went to Stuart Granger for the Men from Shiloh. And I won't say any much more about that, if it's all right with you. That speaks for itself. I would like to see some more of that wonderful music come back. I'll be out in front.
2 more questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Drury, could you tell us a little bit about the 2 movies that you did for Disney and what it was like working for Walt Disney?
Well, it was wonderful because Walt made a point of coming out down to the set of every picture that he was shooting, and he would greet everyone who was working in the picture and the people who were working on the picture by name and shake their hands every morning. I don't know how he managed to do it, but he knew everybody, and he never met a stranger, and he was always lifting us up, encouraging us, inspiring us to do better. Everybody loved Walt, and everybody loved working for him. I started with him with a series called El Fego Baca, which was the Legends of El Fego Baca with, the Italian guy. What? What'd they say? I'm having a senior moment, folks. I can't remember. He's one of my best friends. Anyway, it'll come to me. This has happened before, but not often, but it has happened. Then they put me in Toby Tyler, and I made a big mistake shooting that chimp out of that tree. A lot of kids have never forgiven me for that, but I only winged him, you know. I didn't take his life. And then we went to 10 Who Dared, which was the story of the first party of men to come down through the Colorado River Rapids in the Grand Canyon. And it was the Powell Party, and they named Lake Powell at Page, Arizona, after the leader of the party. And then I did Pollyanna for him. And Pollyanna was a joy to be on. And I got to work with my old friend Richard Egan from Love Me Tender Days, and of course Jane Wyman, and Nancy Olson was my love interest. I was her boyfriend, and I got to work with the wonderful Haley Mills, who was just as sweet as could be. And of course, Pollyanna is the story about the little girl who's optimistic. So she's an optimist. It's the story of an optimist, and it makes everybody who watches it optimistic. And there's nothing wrong with that, folks. So I enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you.
Overall, in your career, did you ever come face to face with a severe challenge that you thought you could never get through, but somehow God stepped in and he allowed you to pull through automatically?
Well, I don't know about that. You know, I believe in God, and I believe in the separation of church and state, and I believe in the training of an actor pulling him through. I think God's too busy to worry about a television show myself, and also I think he's too busy to worry about a baseball game. That's what Lance Bergman tells me anyway. But there have been some challenges. There's an episode of the Virginian called Felicity Spring. Many of you may remember that. It was a wonderful love story about a girl named Felicity that I fell madly in love with, and was about to marry. And then, of course, in the 89th minute, she had to die of a dread disease because you couldn't have the Virginian married off. That would cut down on his ability to go from port to port, so to speak. But the girl who they brought in to play that role was a gal named Catherine Crawford. And, you know, have you ever met somebody you just flat didn't like? On sight? I mean, just didn't like them. No good reason for it, just didn't like them. She didn't like me, and I didn't like her. We played these wonderful love scenes together, and then we would retreat, me to one corner of the soundstage, and her way over there to the other corner. We never spoke except on the screen. She was the daughter of a man named Roy Huggins, who was one of the executive producers of the show, and later married Frank Price, and is still married to Frank Price, who was also one of the executive producers on the show. That wasn't why I didn't like her. I just didn't like her. We have since become good friends. But at the time, I couldn't stand her, and she told me she couldn't stand me. That's probably the most memorable love story we ever produced. So it just goes to show, if you really want to rise to the challenge, you can do it. Thank you, folks. Let's hear some more of that wonderful music.